Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Russell Rucker. I'm an author of Textualism and Originalism in Our Constitutional Republic, and that's depicted in the poster right above my head. I'm also the author of Our Founders and Why They Matter, in their words and why they matter. And you'll see a poster in the other chair next to me there depicting that. I want to thank Reader's Magnet for allowing me the time here today, and I'm really happy to be part of the Festival of Storytellers. It's a great event, and I feel real happy to discuss the issues here. My books are in essence about the Constitution, about our founding period, why we did what we did, in an effort to make people better understand our founding documents and our Constitution. I want to draw your attention to the banner behind me. It's in 3 panels. And the first panel over here, seated, is Robert Morris. He's the financier of the revolution. And this painting was done by Howard Christie in 1940 for the sesquicentennial of the signing of the Constitution. Now, above Robert Morris, in the spectacles, you'll see James Wilson, who was a Supreme Court justice. And then, of course, Washington has his hand outstretched, looking over towards the crowd. So, I'm pointing out some of the main characters here. In this panel, seated here, you have Benjamin Franklin, and next to him, whispering in his ear, is Alexander Hamilton. Above him, standing in the corner, is Gouverneur Morris. Gouverneur Morris was the penman of the Constitution. He wrote the preamble. James Madison, in black here, he's known as the father of our Constitution. He wrote the outline of our current Constitution for the most part. When you get up, the gentleman in the red coat, there's a head inside his arm. That is Mr. Patterson from New Jersey. He wrote the New Jersey plan. And in the final panel, off to my right, you'll see 2 gentlemen with their hands outstretched. Both of those are named Pinckney. The one in the red coat is Charles Pinckney. He's known as Constitutional Charlie because he spoke so often during the convention. And you have the lower 3 in the far corner. If you count 3 in, you have Rufus King. He was the last Federalist who ran for president. He was the last one they were able to field. Now, I bring this up because we're going into the convention here. Okay, well, we're going to discuss the plans of the convention. So on February 21st, 1787, Congress passed a resolution calling for a convention to be held in the State House in Philadelphia. And the objective was to write amendments to update the Articles of Confederation. The biggest problem with the Articles of Confederation was there was no way to force the states to do what they had asked. So they could pass something, but then they were at the mercy of the states to cough up any money that it took to do any of these things. So it was kind of a weak document, and it became a big problem, especially among trade. They had some, like the Annapolis Convention, which was about trade, and they had several of these throughout the colonies, one leading into another. And so here we were going into the convention. James Madison of Virginia, he has in an upper floor of his home, he has a pretty decent library. And he used this library to study every form of self-government, the ancient governments of Rome, of Greece. He studied Magna Carta. He looked for everywhere that self-government was, and he was trying to draw up a plan, which became the outline. He went to see Washington, and he told Washington what he was up to about a whole new plan, because that's not what they were sent to do. But somehow he got a list of all the delegates. So he was going through that list, trying to figure out who would agree with him on this and who wouldn't. So he was checking them off if they would agree to him. And he arrived early in Philadelphia. And they were supposed to start the meeting on May 15th. He arrived on the 14th. But really, they weren't able to conduct business till the 29th, because it took them that long for enough of the states to get there in order to have a quorum. So on the 29th, they began conducting business, and you can find all these plans in chapter 21 of Our Founders in Their Words and Why They Matter. I have a whole chapter on it with the different plans all written out in detail so that you can actually look at them and compare them. So on the 29th, they decided to set up a rules committee, and they adjourned. And the next day, the rules committee set up the rules. There was a motion to have it all in secret so that people could change their mind without it being in the paper, and so that it would be easier to change people's minds if they wanted to come up and make some kind of change or agreement with someone else. So that was the reason for the secrecy. So James Madison's outline was there, and Mr. Edwin Randolph from Virginia proposed it. And just to he spent all day proposing the plan. And at the end of the day, Charles Pinckney rose and said, basically, hey, I got a plan here too. So both plans were presented, and it was agreed that they would be laid on the table for comparison the next day. So I want to go through these two plans and the differences in it so you understand them. The Virginia plan started to correct the articles to include common defense, security of liberty, and general welfare. Okay. The Pinckney plan They wanted a superintending government and for common benefit and to keep the federation of states. And that's the big difference here is Madison's plan, the Virginia plan, had a whole new kind of federal government. And Pinckney's plan was just making additions to the Articles of Confederation. So that makes a big difference here. And I think that's the largest difference between the two plans. But I regress. We'll get back into it. The legislature, by either contribution or population, and this is the Virginia plan. Okay, two branches of the legislature. The first branch would be elected by the people, and the second branch would be elected out of the first branch. Okay, now Pinckney's plan had two branches, the House of Delegates and a Senate. The House would be by population. The Senate would have 4 districts. So each term, like we have today, you have a third of the Senate up every 2 years. He actually had this in sections of the country. So New England would be up 1 year, and then you get the upper middle, and then the middle states, and then the southern states would be in the 4th year. So you had an election every year for the Senate. Now the executive. The Virginia plan, the executive was elected by the legislature. So the people did not get a vote on who the executive was. And the executive, of course, would be our president. Would consist of a council of revision to review laws passed and even state laws prior to their enactment. And a Supreme Court would be part of the executive branch. And this is another place Pinckney's plan really gets a difference, because Congress would appoint the judges, would appoint the president, would appoint the president's cabinet. Congress would oversee the militia, and there would be no Army or Navy. So that's quite a difference between the two when you're actually comparing them. Then there would be a provision of states. This is back to the Virginia plan. There would be a provision for admission of states. And there would be, in the Pinckney plan, there would be a method for considering new states. The Virginia plan, you'd have a guarantee of a Republican form of government. And in the Pinckney plan, the Articles of Confederation to be observed, and the Union would be perpetual. The Virginia plan also called for an oath of office and amendments to be approved by the state legislatures. So here we have the two main plans. And there was a lot of discussion and debate back and forth, and a lot of compromise made in these plans. But I've already got a couple notes, so I want to get to them. Timothy, this is a very good recap of American politics. Well, thank you very much, but I really think we're talking about more of history than politics, unless we're talking about the politics of the 1700s. So I think that's the important thing here, is we aren't getting into modern politics. Zebby says, "Hi, Russell. I'm new here. I love your office." Well, thank you. You know, this is actually my studio for my YouTube channel. And there's a lot of things I have in here to kind of tell the story. And I've been running that channel for about 8 months. And the whole purpose of it is to make people better understand the Constitution. So there's a lot of different things in here. Like I have a globe that's drawn to 1783, and different things like that to help tell the story. And this painting back here is the signing of the Constitution. So I think that's kind of an important thing to understand. It's not the first painting of it, because even like Harper's Weekly around the centennial, 1876 had things in the drawings in the paper and that. But this is a very famous painting of the signing of the Constitution. So I thank you very much. I like this studio too. Okay, now going on, they're discussing these plans, and they get a month or two into it, and they kind of drop the Pinckney plan. And so they start working off just the Virginia plan. And there are those that are not happy about this because they thought that some of the members thought that they were going too far in their discussions and debates and agreements, because they thought they had overdone what a mission of Congress had given them a mission for amendments. And here we were discussing a whole new Constitution. And so there were some members that were not happy about this. Okay. On June 15th, keep in mind, now we've been in session for 2 months. Patterson, who I mentioned earlier in the second panel where you can just see his head, he rises with a whole nother plan. He wants to replace the Virginia plan with this plan, and this is known as the New Jersey plan. Okay. So he wanted to enlarge the Articles of Confederation, and he wanted to appoint persons to the executive and not to be re-eligible for re-election. So the presidents, plural, because he wanted more than one. So he wanted persons to be in the executive so that they would have 2 presidents to work out situations, I guess, to converse with each other and come to some serious decisions. He said especially of measures of war. He thought it was important that not just one man make that decision. And then they would be ineligible to run a second time. He wanted a provision of new states to be the same throughout. So new states would be the same no matter where they were, and the way of getting new states. He wanted uniform naturalization. So new citizens would be uniform no matter where they were coming from. Now, way back, before you had a United States, when we were colonies, you immigrated to say the Commonwealth of Virginia or Rhode Island and plantation, the individual colonies. So it was so this is that understanding that it would be the same no matter where you were immigrating to. And he wanted treaties to be enforced by the executive. So we go through these plans, and that was his plan. And that's when Hamilton said he needed a day. He needed a day to think about it, and he said he had something he wanted to discuss. And so they adjourned for the night. And the next day, Hamilton rose, and he spent the whole day discussing all these plans and telling people what they wanted. Now, this is known as the Hamilton Plan, but by his own admission, there really was no plan. He didn't submit anything in writing. So they're discussing it. So he spends the whole day telling them what they want, but there's nothing really official. So the next day they go back to rehashing and trying to decide, and they're fighting over this division all the way to July 4th of remember the Virginia plan. It said by population or by basically by wealth. Okay, what you could provide or what you could give to the union. So it was either a monetary wealth kind of thing, or it was population, and they were arguing about that immensely. But see, these other two plans, the plans that still dealt with the Articles of Confederation. See, the Articles of Confederation, every state had one vote. And there were those that wanted to keep that in the Senate because they wanted the states not to be feared that the larger states, like say New York and Virginia, would run over the other states because they had heavier population, and they wanted to have a say. So this was the big debate, and they put together a committee to sort this out. And that's when they came back with a House by population. This is called the Great Compromise. They came back with a House by population, Senate by state, giving equality in the Senate to each state. But once they did that, there was still a lot of arguing back and forth. They just didn't want to go along with it. And that's why they made these changes to, like, the House. All spending bills would have to start in the House. The Senate would have the right to Supreme Court nominees, to treaty agreements. And that was the reason for doing this. So you split up the powers between the two. And this was called the Grand Compromise, and this is the purpose of going through and doing that. And in the process, they made all kinds of stipulations and rules back and forth. And there were some members that thought they were going too far in hashing through and making things too complicated. But this is the Great Compromise they finally came up with, and they kind of went along with that. But all these plans are important because they tell us what way they were discussing and what they were thinking in the convention. It gives us an idea of why they did what they did. And it's important, really, even for a modern understanding of what the Constitution means, because it tells us what they were thinking in the Constitution. It gives we have arguments back and forth, thankfully, for the records. Pinckney's plan is an interesting situation because they were actually using it earlier this year to sort out a question of redistricting, at the Supreme Court. I don't know where they were getting that, but that's what they were talking that they were doing. So I'm just not sure, but that's it. But the thing about Pinckney is, in 1818, all the records from the convention were sent to John Quincy Adams, and he was supposed to put everything together to preserve the records of the convention. But the Pinckney plan was missing. So they asked Charles Pinckney to give the plan, to send a plan in. And the problem was, the plan he sent in looked awful lot like the Virginia plan. And it even was disputed by his own arguments in the convention. Remember, I mentioned earlier, he was called Constitutional Charlie because he would argue on almost everything. So there was a large record of what he said. Now, where I got the Pinckney plan is I took it from the notes of James Wilson. Okay, because even historians doubt what Pinckney submitted. Most all the records were given it to Mr. Jackson, who was the secretary of the convention. So when written speeches were done, and they weren't always written, but like Ben Franklin would submit written speeches and then ask somebody else to read it for him. Remember, Ben Franklin suffered heavily from gout, and he had this chair with rails on it. It kind of looks like the Ark of the Covenant from the Bible. Okay, and he had this chair, and they would carry him in when he was suffering from gout. But he really was attentive almost all the time, and he would speak on matters that he thought were real important. He was an aging statesman, and one of only two aging statesmen. And even Washington, because of his strong stature, stepped aside. He would step aside and allow Gorham, who was the chair of the Committee of the Whole. Okay, so he would help him run things. So he tried to step aside and and give others a chance to speak. I need to get to some of this here, some of these questions here. Eloise, what do you think of the primaries? Well, I don't really, they aren't constitutional. They aren't in the Constitution telling us how to do that. And our founders really never thought a lot about political parties. In fact, as I mentioned earlier in the week, Washington was in his farewell address, he was arguing against parties. And I don't have a problem per se with parties, but we need to be Americans first and members of a political party second. And the primaries really are just a way for the parties to nominate their members, to get their nominee. So I think it's really the kind of the party's business. But I mean, like today with the presidential election going on, and some states have caucuses and some states have primaries. And I have voted in both systems, and I have no problem with either of them. But really, they aren't in the Constitution. It's the parties decide who their nominees are. So I guess that's all I can say to that. Camellia, looking back at the convention and the plans proposed, what lesson or rights can we draw from this historical event that are relevant to contemporary discussions about government and constitutional principles? Wow, that's a mouthful. Well, I'll tell you what, Kamala. It tells us what they were thinking. So when you look at the record of the convention and you listen to, say, Gouverneur Morris or Robert Morris or Madison or any of the others that were talking and making arguments, and it's just like in Congress today. You get one person goes up and makes a speech, another makes a speech. So you get the idea of what they were actually thinking and what they were believing and what they thought this was interpreting. And I think that's what's important when you look at original interpretation of it, is it helps you to better understand what they were referring to. Robert A. Russell, what strategies were employed by propaganda of the Pinckney Plan to garner support among delegates at the Constitutional Convention, and what obstacles did they face in advancing their proposals? Well, ironically, there wasn't a lot of talk on the Pinckney Plan because it was dismissed almost immediately, and they started working on the Virginia Plan. But the interesting thing is, Pinckney kept bringing up different points throughout it and trying to bring things back that had already been discussed and dismissed. And some of the others did this as well. When you get in just past the fourth, some of the members that were for these other plans left the convention as they were losing the argument. For instance, you had 3 representatives from New York. Only Hamilton was left to sign the document. Yates and can't remember the other off the top of my head had left. So I mean, it gets to that kind of thing. They were, arguing back and forth, trying to get things taken care of. And then they would bring things back if they lost. So it was kind of an interesting thing. Chloe, hi Russell. Would you say that we're doing Hamilton Federalist vision right? Not really, but Hamilton, the Federalists kind of lost vogue. They got weaker and weaker till about 1820 when they almost didn't exist. In fact, a lot of the Federalists were running for office, became Republicans later, which is the Jeffersonian Republicans, and then some of them ran as independents later. But you're right. I think we should be looking at the government that we were promised, and that's what we should be going by, with a more limited federal government as defined. If it's not in there, it ain't in there. And I think that's what's important. If there's something so important that we need to add it, then we should send an amendment to the states and let them sort out whether it's going to be part of the Constitution. Riley says, what do you recommend people should do to learn more about what's happening with our government? Well, the thing is, Riley, I'm not about our current government. I'm about how it was supposed to be set up and the historical aspect and understanding of it. I think the best thing that we can do as individuals is when things are running, when people are running for office, we need to get things sorted out with candidates sooner. I know I'm running quickly out of time. Zuri, hi Russell. If you had the opportunity to formulate a new law in this generation, what would it be? Well, I have no idea for sure, but I've clearly run out of time here. I'm going to have to take in the other couple people on Monday and discuss that. My website, russelljrucker.com, you can get a signed copy of my book there. And I mentioned the YouTube. And of course, you can also get my books through Amazon and through Barnes and Noble and through Reader's Magnet. And also, I have a discussion group on Facebook. It's called Friends of Textualism and Originalism. And that's a pretty intellectual group with a lot of knowledgeable people, and a lot of discussion is there on our Constitution. So I thank you very much for your time today, and I hope to see you next week. I'm going to discuss the Electoral College on Monday, the election of 1800, and the 12th Amendment that deals with the Electoral College. So I hope to see you then. Thank you so much for today, and we'll talk to you again. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.